We're here to talk about the Accelerated Construction Program, and it kind of came up briefly this morning in the We Build Texas presentation that was done, and this is a subset of the We Build Texas program, really focusing on execution and delivering, particularly of some of our bigger projects, but it's not just limited to our bigger projects. So what is accelerated construction, and why are we talking about it? Well, some people may think that accelerated construction is when you finish your PS&E and you're putting your construction schedule together and you figure out your production rates so you know how much time to put on the project, that somebody stands up in a meeting and says, you know what, we're just going to cut the contractor 10 or 15% short on time and we're going to make him accelerate. That is not accelerated construction. Accelerated construction has to start in the preliminary engineering phase of project development, and even back into programming, because it's probably going to cost TxDOT a little bit more money to accelerate these projects. So now we're going to talk about how do you select a project, what are the considerations that go into deciding whether or not a project should be accelerated. But the bottom line of this slide, the decision-making process is at the beginning of the project development process, not the end. So we have been doing some accelerated construction. It's not a new concept to TxDOT. We've been talking about this for 20 to 30 years now, and in fact, we do accelerate certain projects, and we're accelerating, maybe up to 10 or 20% of time on certain projects. But we think that if we really do this right, and we focus on the priorities, and we have a better understanding of the cost associated with the work that we do, and I'm talking about the direct cost as well as the indirect cost, and I'll define what that means, that we could actually accelerate some of these projects and deliver the transportation improvements quicker to our customers to the tune of 20 to 50%. And there's certainly examples we have out there where projects have been accelerated to that amount, if not a little bit more. There are impacts to the agency, and there are some of those listed there. We've got some increased engineering cost. We're going to have some increased prices to pay on some of these projects. Safety is certainly a consideration, but the public is the one that's really going to benefit from accelerated construction, but they're spending their time on the roads. They're spending hours in delayed travel times going through these work zones, and there's certainly damage to their vehicles in certain cases and safety considerations for the public. The contractor, there are some of the things that the contractor has to consider in this accelerated construction program. So we have direct cost. I mentioned that. We're really good at TxDOT of determining our direct cost of a project. We have 100 years worth of bid prices on how much it costs us to perform certain tasks on a project. What we're not so good at is recognizing the indirect cost, the economic cost to the businesses that may be within our work zones. What's it cost to them when we have to close one of their driveways so that we can reconstruct the driveway? How does that affect customers getting to their business? We think about that, but we don't assign a cost associated with those types of economic impacts to the adjacent business, as well as the local economic cost associated with our construction work zones. So what we've asked TTI to do is help us develop a tool, and they've done that. They helped us develop a tool that helps us understand the indirect costs. So now, to determine how much to accelerate a project and how much additional cost the taxpayers should bear to accelerate a construction project, we're not limited to road user costs. That's our traditional way of determining the cost to the users of the system. Now we can look at road user costs, and through this tool that TTI developed, we can also look at the indirect economic impacts associated with our work. Because at the end of the day, all these costs are borne by the public. Here's a graphic that TTI put together. I'm not going to cover it. It gives you the idea. The top line is the total cost, and then the second to the top line is the construction cost. You can see the low point on that second line, but what we need to take into account when you look at economic impacts and the cost to the public is the low point for the total cost, including the economic impacts, is actually in a different location. That's the point of this graph, and we can talk about that more in some of the workshops we're doing around the state. So we're looking at construction time and how to reduce it. We talked earlier this morning about how important finishing projects on time is. Of course, the contractors and TxDOT are interested in finishing the projects on budget also. But we have different methods we can employ. We can look at our design bid build program, the traditional program. We can look at our alternative delivery program. We can look at A+B bidding is a good way to have contractors bid time against one another to reduce the length of time on these projects. It's an excellent tool on certain projects. We can have milestones. We can have no excuse incentives in these projects so that we can incentivize the contractors to resource the projects at a higher capacity to help deliver these projects. And then we can look at lane rentals, which is lane occupancy, and look at the different peak times, day times, weekend times, night times, and we can set the projects up that way and structure them to help incentivize the progression of work to get off the road and deliver the improvements quicker. There are great material opportunities when you stop and think about how much time and money we spend just moving materials in and out of construction work zones. So maybe there's an opportunity to reuse some of those materials rather than hauling them off and bringing new materials in. We need to take a look at all that. And there's equipment issues here. We've engaged the equipment manufacturing industry to help us maybe invent some new machinery, some new equipment that could help us deliver transportation improvements quicker to our customers. Well, then we need to also look at quality control. Just because you accelerate something does not mean you sacrifice quality. It does not mean we sacrifice safety of the workers or safety of the public. Those two priorities remain at the top of the list, but we do need to look at perhaps some rapid material testing procedures. We need to look at some providing better feedback, quicker feedback to the contractor. We can't afford, if we're going to have the contractor producing at higher rates, we can't afford to wait a week or two to get test results back. Because by then he's long down the road. We're done. We've got it covered up and we're building the road. We're moving on. So we've got to perhaps look at some of our testing methods to make sure it supports this. But here are the keys to accelerated construction. Look at the planning stages. That's where it has to all begin. Use the indirect cost calculation tool that I mentioned that TTI developed. Isolate construction work from traffic as long as possible so you have work zones. You're not moving traffic control all around all the time. That takes time, that costs money, and there's some delays associated with that as far as building the improvements. Reuse existing materials, maintain lane closures as long as possible. Innovative approaches to handling traffic. There may be some ideas we haven't even thought about on how to handle traffic in certain situations. And perhaps it means if you're going to redo an intersection, you just close the intersection down for a long weekend and do a 24-hour operation. Get in and out and stay out of that particular area. That's a part of our accelerated construction program. And this whole thought process needs to be baked into our standard operating procedures in our project development processes. And it's not limited to the big projects. I don't think it's limited to metropolitan district projects. I think there are some rural examples out there that we could take a look at also. So we are hosting 7 regional workshops around the state. We've had 3 so far. We've had 4 more coming up here starting in November, Dr. Epps, and continue into December. So there is a workshop opportunity coming to you where we go through this in great detail. We spend a whole day talking about accelerated construction, and the point of the workshops is to get feedback from everybody. Are we doing the right things? Have we thought about everything? Is the tool good? Is it going to help us arrive at the right decisions and the right conclusions? And then hopefully from your input through the workshops, we will be able to go back and draft more guidance for our districts and perhaps put a policy in place that formally implements accelerated construction. So the bottom line is we got to be smarter in the projects that we select to implement this on. It is not for every project. and you come to our workshops, and we say that repeatedly all day long. It is not for every project. But I know we're letting projects today that we probably need to consider this and should have considered it a few years ago when we were developing the project originally in the preliminary engineering phase. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Philip. Does his PowerPoint come up right now?
Thank you, Randy. We're going to go through quite a few topics here. My contractor perspective is obviously to try to bring somewhere where the rubber meets the road on how the contracting community benefits, but also has to be able to be successful with accelerated construction techniques. We'll cover some broad topics. We'll cover some very specific topics about instances where you can make huge gains in the critical path on a project. But there's a lot of things that, from the broad stroke view of this, you know, it's something that everybody's got to go in and think about what is really driving the schedule on this project. If you're going in, focus on your critical path activities. Find out what's driving your schedule, find out how to shorten that. Keep those utility delays out of your schedule. That starts all the way back in the beginnings of the design process. And figure out ways to start attacking the utilities early, make it where that process doesn't become a delay later. Simplify your design. We'll touch on some very specific topics about that here in a minute. Contractors are creatures of habit. We're creatures of repetitive nature. If you can simplify it where we can do the same thing over faster and faster, you're going to get a faster project. Seeing the bigger picture. When you're out on the job and you're out there trying to look at all these issues, you've got to be able to keep the project in mind. Leave the egos at the door, leave the little minutia at the door, make decisions and find ways to be able to move the project along to everybody's benefit. Avoid red tape. Step back and look at your solutions. Are the solutions simple solutions? Or are these solutions that are going to lead you down a utility road, an economic road, some sort of road with government entities that may be outside of TxDOT, cities, municipal areas, different things with the core? Be smart about things where you can maybe change your design even slightly to take you out of those zones. Make sure you check your ego at the door. Everybody comes into the project, all need to be pulling the cart in the same direction. It's not about you, it's not about them. You've got to be able to come in with a we mentality for the traveling public. You've got to be proactive instead of reactive. This will be a key thing we talk about here is you're gonna have problems. It's gonna happen. It's a construction project. There is no construction project out there that went from A to B on time with zero problems. It's just not a reality anymore. So instead of waiting for that problem to happen, put your solutions in place so when it does happen. If you don't need the solution, don't use it. But you have it in place so that when the problem occurs, you're talking about solutions in days, possibly even hours, as opposed to weeks, possibly months, possibly even longer. Also, keep that open mind. This is something that when we see some very out-of-the-box things up here, Randy's talked about it, you hear a lot of the contractors talk about it, we've done it. We've done it. We've been successful at it. Everybody's still alive after the project's over. Nobody, you know, died or went to jail or anything. So be open about these things and realize, wow, that is out of the box, but it can work. Think about what works and how to keep that open mind. So something Randy mentioned is accelerated intersections. That's a big thing. My company does in particular. I think that's a spot that's heavily underutilized in a lot of these suburban corridors where people are going in and you have a ton of traffic. Most of the time we get to these projects, they're years and years overdue. At the time we've got here now, the traffic's already there. You're pretty much in a no-win scenario the day you step on it. Be prepared before you get to it. Have these designs in place in the original plans. I can tell you the plans we've seen, and we're starting to see now where the day we bid it, there's alternate subgrades already designed in there. You want to be able to do an HES intersection with no subgrade? Be able to have that plan in place, have the quantities in place in your E&Q. That way it's simply a decision for the designer of record to go, I want to do A, I want to do B. You don't want to be trying to negotiate change order pricing then, because all that's going to do is delay the work. Make sure you've got that mechanism built into your plan. Like I said, put an item in there for deeper asphalt, HES concrete. If you don't use it, you don't use it. But if you need it, you have it, and you can make a decision on Wednesday that maybe the right decision is to pour this weekend instead of 2 months from now. Even if it's designed with lime or cement in your subgrade, make sure you've considered faster options. Have a flex base item in there. Design maybe something with no subgrade. Go back to the design phase, look at your soil maps, look at your geotechs, see if you can understand that maybe while the project called for lime, have a flex base item in there. Have a quicker option in there as something that gets you through. And like I said, again, if you don't need it, you don't have to use it. HES is something we're seeing on a lot of projects now in certain key intersections or driveways, but it's underutilized. There's lots of things else you can do besides concrete pavement. We've accelerated projects by going in and having HES designed for inlet throats. We're putting in now, instead of putting cement stabilized backfill at abutments, go ahead and design that with a HES flowable fill. Now you've taken a 4-day process and turned it into a 4-hour process that you get resolved the next day and you can move on. Also, try to think about any non-structural concrete. Can I accelerate this somehow? Reach out to your contractor. He can reach out to his designers, reach out to his ready-mix companies. He can find solutions for you if you're willing to work with them. Also, maturity meters, they're a vastly underutilized tool, but they are a tool. That's something that both sides have to agree very early on if maturity meters are going to be used and how they're going to be used, because that's a very important tool that can be misconstrued if you go in with the wrong idea on it. It helps with time, it helps with strength, but you've got to have that plan in advance. So this is an example where I won't stay on it very long, but it was a project where we went in after the fact and we had alternate subgrades. We did by change order, but now I have seen a project we've bid in DFW in the last couple months where this was in the bid design. You had a subgrade A, subgrade B, and quantities where the engineer was able to choose now, which one do I want to use at go time. Makes the process a lot faster. Utility delays, they're the bane of every contractor and every DOT person sitting in here and every designer. It's something we beat our heads on the wall every day. I guarantee you, if the department and the contractor can realize they've got to work together and lock arms to fix it, they're going to move faster than any franchise utility will ever go. Absolutely. But you've got to be willing to do it. You got to understand that you're going to do some out-of-the-box things there. Don't be afraid to think substantially out of the box. Sometimes it's a different foundation, it's a different structure, move things over. Just because maybe in this particular district we've never put the pipe under the roadway with this type of inlet, reach out to your peers down in Austin in the design. Maybe there's an inlet somewhere in San Antonio they've used that Dallas has never used. Call somebody and find out what their other options are and find out how to move this over. Because I guarantee you, if you're sitting there having to argue with a contractor about, well, this is going to add $5,000 or $10,000 worth of change order work, and the other answer is 3 years from now arguing about 6 months worth of liquidated damages, overhead, and barricades, that'll be the cheapest $20,000 you ever spent, ever. It's always going to be cheaper to work around that solution than stop and have to take a knee and figure out what's going on. Always going to be the most cost-effective option to figure it out. And stop asking when you start running into these problems. Everybody goes and looks immediately to what's in place and goes, well, do I have a pay item to handle this? What's our standard? What does this say in the plans we got to do? Stop there. Really go out, go to the field, look in the hole, look up at the structure, see what the conflict is, and go, what is it going to take to fix this? Reach out to your contracting partner, reach out to your engineers and go, how do I solve this problem? Come up with a solution, then go back to your standards. Again, go back and see where the edges are. You know, the first director of construction I ever worked with in this business looked at me and said, you know, the spec book is the start. It's not the end. You've got to be able to reference that, but you've got to know what construction takes. You've got to know what the solution is as an engineer. Then go find where the edges are. Don't put yourself in the box to start with and go, well, here's the outside of the box. Go figure out what the solution is, then figure out what you need from the spec book. Particular example we went through there, some people, I show this to certain designers and they cringe. You know, we had a job with 31 separate franchise utilities on it in a mile. 30-inch, 24-inch laterals, they were never going to happen. I guarantee you we'd still be on this job from 10 years ago. We did some very out-of-the-box things with PVC laterals. We went in there and did a lot of kind of on-the-fly construction, had a great engineer who worked with us on that because he understood I'm either going to have a $40 million job where we're going to be talking about months or years worth of delays, or we're going to get out of the box. He went and found a hydrology designer over at District, grabbed him for a week, snuck him over to his side. We worked through all this, and in a week, we came up with plan sheets, got it out, got it built, added 5 days to the job. 5 days as opposed to how long to move 8 franchise utilities, including multiple gas and fiber lines. It's a big, big difference if you get out of that box. Simplify your design. Like I said, contractors are going to be creatures that are all about how do I have repetitive motion? How do I be able to do the same thing over and over without having redone fixed cost, adjusting forms, adjusting paving machines, being able to remobilize, changing designs and hot mix silos. If you're going to have a curb and gutter section, make sure you think about where that curb and gutter lies on your grade. If you put the the asphalt down first and then make you put the curb and gutter on it, and that work has to take place, and then you have to come back with a hot mix, now you've essentially had 2 hot mix mobilizations. Maybe you're lucky and your contractor does hot mix, maybe he doesn't. Now you've added time to that project. You can easily have a section designed quite well with the curb and gutter sitting on the grade. Try to avoid using multiple types or classes of hot mix in a section. Yes, there are times it's absolutely required, especially on freeways and especially in high traffic areas. But I've seen typical sections that have 5 different classes of hot mix in a 10-inch section. To be honest, it's absolutely ridiculous. Find out the right solution that gives you a strong base layer and get the right surface on it. Because every time that hot mix contractor has to stop, he's got that in his silo. If you're in some small phase and he's got to change his silo 5 times, that's almost guaranteed 5 days. If you can get it down to 2, now it's 2 days. If you can take an intersection where you're trying to wrap up a project and it's a high volume intersection, the difference between 5 days and 2 days, massive, absolutely massive to the traveling public. Think about your roadway geometry, especially in relation to structures. Just because you can draw it and you can make it look like that, is it necessary? You know, if I've got a bridge here and I show a turning radius going to an intersection, and now I'm going to have to go do instead of doing a conventional overhang, I'm going to have to put up shoring and do a cast in place edge and do some post tensioning. If I can just shove the roadway geometry over 3 feet and now the curve takes place as a stripe on the bridge as opposed to a structure, how much have you saved then? Now it can be done with conventional forming techniques. It's not always possible. Sometimes the geometry is what it is. But I think too often as designers, there's the guy designing the roadway geometry in PGL, and then there's this guy over here designing the structure, and the structure guy's taking what he's given and going, well, this is what I got to build to make it work. Link those two together and see if you can really make some changes there. Use of common paving widths. I think that's something that I'm honestly surprised contractors don't complain about more. That is something there, if you've ever sat out on a paving spread on a big concrete job, paving, and then you always wonder, why are you not paving today? And you see this whole group of men just swarming over the machines because they have to change the paving width. Again, sometimes it's absolutely necessary. The project I'm paving right now, where I have a frontage road going for a mile and I have 5 different paving widths in a mile that require 4 machine changes because it's 4 foot different. I can't imagine that there wasn't a simpler solution, because instead of now having 3 days of machine changes for an entire paving train times 4, could have been times 2. How much can be changed there? Simplify that design. Just because a design manual may tell you at this speed this is this and this speed this is this, find out if the right answer is to make it a ½ foot bigger or a ½ foot smaller, and go talk to your engineer of record. Go talk to somebody. Just because a design manual or something you've done in the past says we do this, don't just go, that's law. Go find out what the right answer is and simplify it, and go talk to somebody. Maybe you can do it, maybe you can't do it, but you never know until you find out. Simplify those designs. On a large interstate concrete job, you would be shocked, utterly shocked at how many days are spent on the critical path doing paving machine changes to accommodate a foot, 2 foot, ½ a foot. Because you never know. Sometimes the machine can adjust ½ a foot. Sometimes you've reached the minimum. It may be a whole new machine, depending on the machine the contractor has. Major differences there. Make it a repeatable process. That's what you want. If there's a way to have this road at a 16-foot lane and this at a 16-foot lane, figure that out. Make sure you can do that. Bridge rail, stick to what can be slip formed. Really think about this, and if you have a choice, sometimes drainage comes in, sometimes creek flow, sometimes a lot of the hydrology comes in, but if you can stick to something that can be slip formed as opposed to something that's got to be hand formed, ballpark it gets done in about 20% of the time. Is the bridge rail on the critical path? Occasionally, sometimes depending on the structure. And if you talk about a job that can be a bridge that's a mile long, and you can suddenly take an end critical path activity and cut 20% out of it, on a mile-long job, you'll be talking about what, weeks? Cutting down the bridge rail? Simple things like that are just the difference between a slip design and a hand design. Think about sometimes, now it's time to spend the money. I know everybody's concerned with, we've got this money from the taxpayers, we've got these new budgets, how do we stretch more dollars per mile? But think about, how do I really get this done? Sometimes you'll see that you'll design something and go, well, I'm going to split this road into phase 1 and phase 2 because I don't want to put in 6 miles of barrier. I want to put 3 miles, and then we'll figure out a way to do the next 3 miles, and we split it in half. And you've got a contractor here with resources chomping at the bit to go build the 6 miles. Sometimes it makes sense. Cut the check. Pay for the barrier up front. Get it done that way. Sometimes think about the barrier types that are out there. We've gone over the last couple of years where barrier is changing types. Some contractors have existing barriers, some don't. Think about what you have and talk to your contractors who work in your area. Know the resources you have and understand that if you've got a job that you're fixing to put 100,000 foot of barrier on, you really need to think about, maybe I need to go to something a little more existing, because if you let a project 2 months later, this contractor has to go cast 100,000 foot of barrier, there's only 3 vendors in the state of Texas minus a couple contractors who perform this themselves. The odds are you're going to have a delay up front waiting on them to cast barrier. Think about your resources. If you are unsure, reach out to the contracting community and ask them. We'll be happy to tell you what we can do and what we can't do. Stamp traffic control plans. Make sure and figure out who gets it done fastest. Sometimes we have an engineer on staff, sometimes we have a consultant, sometimes you guys have somebody over design that's available. It doesn't matter who does it. Figure out who the right answer to do it is so it keeps the project moving. If I can get to it in a week and it's going to take you a month, let me do it and cut me the check for it. If my guys are swamped and you've got somebody on site who can do it, absolutely take it yourself and crank it out, but get it done either way. Keep the job moving. Think about different types of shoring. You know, have that where you're not afraid to go open up a new part of the project due to phasing. Phasing is never designed to be restrictive. Make sure you look at that and understand what you could do with a simple amount of shotcrete or a simple amount of piling to be able to go in here and block this off so I can open this up and get that work going sooner. Sod. Pay for it. Simple enough. If you're going to sell a job at the end, we talked about perception, perception, perception. I've built jobs that I've built in record time, gotten incentives on it, and I waited for months with time suspended to get the sod or get the grass to grow. Was I whole? Yes. Was area engineer still getting worn out by phone calls on why we're not done because there's a water truck running up and down all the time and there's still barricade signs up over season? I guarantee you on some of those jobs, if you could have gone back and cut the check for sod, where after a couple weeks it could have been done and we're away from it, massive difference as far as perception. Is it a check? Yes. Depending on the size of the project, it may not be practical. But if you've got a small project that's in a high visibility area with project stakeholders that are really involved and visible, it's going to be the best money you ever spend. So think about some things. Sometimes you cannot sacrifice safety and quality and trade for speed. Bridge deck riding surfaces. You know, there's a lot of talk of accelerated bridge construction coming down the pike. A lot of amazing ideas that are going to do wonders for this state. Sometimes you really need to think, is this the right area to do it? And you need to be specific. There's a lot of different methods to accelerated bridge construction. Sometimes those don't give us the best quality riding surface. Sometimes if it's a critical intersection, we're willing to sacrifice that. Sometimes not. Think about that. Sometimes you need to understand that you've got multiple crews in a limited workspace, especially in urban districts. You're going to get metro districts. You're going to get into areas there. I mean, it's a hole, a hill, a high structure. You cannot put that many people in one spot. You know, our industry is famous for what we call the project manager misnomer, that 9 women can make a baby in 1 month. Not reality, right? Go in there and realize that there is somehow you can speed it up, but you've got to be limited in what you can do there. Men and machines only go so fast, and some things you really should understand while you can do it, it really should be limited to construction for that, or emergency construction. To speed up here, spec book, it's a guide, supposed to be designed with use for common sense and design parameters. Make sure you see the bigger picture of the forest and the trees. Don't be scared by the perception of regulations and protocol. Avoid that crutch of saying, well, we'll just build it per plan. That's something that's an easy out. Really put some thought into it. Those words should really be uttered after a full decision-making process is done and you've put some thought into it. And build that flexibility in, set your engineer and your contractor up for success so they have those options later and they can actually get things done on time. You can always put those options in and not use them. Some things you really need to think about: 9 to 3:30 closure restrictions. If you're on 635 or 410 or 610 or Trans Mountain, we can talk about that. If you're on Farm to Market 9999 in County X, what are you really getting for that? You're going to inconvenience some traveling public, but you're making it now where what am I really going to get done with 5.5 hours of critical path work per day? Sometimes you need to take that phone call from an angry citizen. They're going to be angry anyway. It doesn't matter if you were out there for 2 years or 2 weeks, they're going to be mad. I have engineers that get called on day one when we've gone out there and set the signs up and they're already losing their mind. Don't be scared of that. If you have a major urban project and a metro project, yes, those restrictions have a place. As you start getting out into the suburban and rural areas, think about that before you put in a set of plans. That is amazingly handicapping. Make sure that you just get it done as quick as possible if you can. Think about what your contractor's fixed times are. It doesn't matter if he goes out and works for 1 hour on the road or 20 hours on the road, he's going to lose an hour on either side of setting up that lane closure. If he goes to work 10 hours and then you get 2 hours, 80% of his shift was working. If you let him work 5 hours and 2 hours of that, now he's got 60% of his shift is working. Really think about what you're handicapping him there. Partnering takes effort and want to. Make sure you empower your personnel to make field level decisions. We had talked about this in an event last night. Quit micromanaging. Let your people make decisions, set up a structure for them to make decisions, and have them where you can come and ask them for help. Stop with telling contractors, well, I got X amount of days to review this, I'll get to it when I get to it. If it's the project moving along, get out of your desk, walk across the district, walk across to bridge design, find a hydraulic engineer, call your CE&I guy. If this is the difference between activity here waiting takes a month or a week, it doesn't matter how many days you got to review it. Every day you take delays the job. Move it along. Take an active role in that. Don't plan for if something goes wrong, but plan for when it goes wrong. And like I said, you can set a number of solutions in place and never use them. Just because it's a last minute idea doesn't mean it's too late, even if you come up with something the day before. Maybe it's too late to enact that. Talk about it. Have a meeting. Listen to the plan. Work towards your contractor being successful. Don't make your set of plans a puzzle. I've had too many designers over the years when I go, well, what does this mean and what does that mean? How do you really think about this? He goes, well, all the information's there. Yeah, but don't you think if you spent a few minutes to put a little extra sentence in there, I can guarantee that I build what you've paid me to build and you got a happy product? Think about that. Neither side should have surprises waiting for them. Make sure you open and honest communication. If you can put 2 sentences in the plan instead of 1 that clarify it, put the 2 sentences. Paper's cheap and we're all digital now. It's really not costing you any money. Bid is shown before the letting. You guarantee you're going to wind up with a change order after it. Get that 60% set of plans out there. Figure out how to make that happen. Get that information in. Sometimes those questions come late in the process, but I guarantee you if a contractor or multiple contractors have pointed out a set of problems pre-bid and your answer is bid is shown, you've guaranteed you just cost the taxpayer money and time. Done. Guaranteed. Take a knee and figure out what's going on. You can get an addendum out, I guarantee you, if you're willing to make it happen. Use of incentives and disincentives. Make sure you think about the careful times to use that. Incentives, you're going to get more with carrot than with stick. If you've got some incentives, you're going to get a more motivated contractor to jump in there and get that done. No excuse incentives. Make sure you've got your ducks in a row and utilities right away. All your stakeholders there. That's a tool. That's a great tool, but it can also be a dangerous tool if used on the wrong project. Time determination calculations. Luckily, I think TxDOT and ATC are fixed to start spending some time on improving that process. Make sure what your time determination calculations are built on a solid foundation. If you're trying to have a project you want to accelerate and your original construction schedule shows we're going to concrete pave on this day and switch traffic the next day on a freeway, you've already accelerated it whether you liked it or not. There's multiple small tasks that need to go in there. You've got to have a solid, real construction schedule that everybody knows is valid. Then you can talk about accelerating that. Make a clean path for value engineering and time savings. Discuss that at the pre-con. Make sure if you've got those ideas, make sure there's a pipeline where they can come in. The worst thing is for the contractor to spend time and money coming up with a value engineering proposal, fling it over to the area office, and it die. Sit there. And understand your bid items and your proper application of them. Make sure you know what you've got to work with. Make sure you understand what the contractors are trying to accomplish and get paid there. The last thing, I'll skip most of this, but the one thing you need to understand there, Prop 1 and Prop 7 were big wins for everybody in this room, everybody. And I guarantee you that when somebody made a decision to vote for Prop 1 and Prop 7, they were not sitting somewhere looking at a park on the side of the road thinking about how nice a bike trail would be here or how we really needed to paint that column maroon instead of beige. They were sitting in traffic somewhere waiting to get home to their families ticked off that this 3-mile drive takes them an hour. That's your voter. Think about what you're going to spend that taxpayer's money on. If it's going to increase safety, productivity, and mobility, do it. If you're really going to talk about a project you want to accelerate in 1 week, and then you're going to walk into another one where you're going to talk about adding a 6-month landscape package to it, really think about if that's something a municipal entity needs to handle later on. People want mobility. They want to go faster. They want to get from A to B cleaner and safer. They're not worried about an aesthetic on a wall, I guarantee you. 1 or 2 of them are. That's not the bulk of the 80% of voters that put Prop 1 and 7 in place. So that's the short version of it. I think there's a lot of things that contractors can do, consultant engineers can do, TxDOT can do, but it's got to take some will. It's got to take some things where you understand you're going to spend some money about it, and it's got to take communication. An honest, good contractor who's willing to move forward with things, and a state engineer who's got an open mind and understands the principles under We Build Texas and this accelerated construction can make a huge difference to accelerating these projects. So